Up next on Inside the SCCA, catching up with a Hall of Famer. Welcome to this episode of Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Bielanski, and this week we continue our series of episodes highlighting and leading up to the 50th anniversary of the SCCA Solo Nationals this year in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's been in several different places over the years. And joining me this evening is none other than solo legend and SCCA Hall of Famer Roger Johnson. Roger, how are you, sir?
Great. Thanks, Brian. Thank you.
Welcome to the show. So when all of us got together, Howard Duncan and Hayward Wagner and I got together and started talking about what we're going to do to lead up to the Solo Nationals, we came up with this plan to get a couple of people together, and we're doing 6 episodes, I believe, and to talk about some of the best folks in the club and involved. And we identified the folks we want to talk to, and you are one of the folks on the list. You've got a fairly significant history here, and that's why you're here. You're a Hall of Famer. You went into the Hall in 2008. I see on the pictures you sent me and on the Hall of Fame page, a Corvette guy. And I think you had some fairly significant dealings on the commercial side of the Solo Nationals. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And welcome to the show.
Well, thanks again. Now, in fairness, I have to tell you that I spent a little bit of time in a Viper.
Oh, okay.
And also, probably my favorite car was a 1971 Pinto that I got to run with my son. So
we're going to talk about that story here, definitely.
Oh, great.
I love the father-son stories. We're coming just off of Father's Day. I started in this crazy sport with my dad. And so I'm going to start with the question that I ask everybody who was on the show. If you've watched the show, you know what's coming. How did you get mixed up in this thing we call racing?
I think just out of high school, somehow, some way, I discovered TSD Rally in the Toledo area. They used to, in the important sports cars section of the Toledo Blade and the classifieds, they'd put if there was a rally going on, and I'm reading import sports car want ads, dreaming and lusting like all of us. And I had a friend that was a little bit older who had a Rambler American, and we went out and ran a TSD Rally. Non-SCCA, it was some independent local club, but out running a rally in a Rambler American.
And that was in what year?
Oh, dear me. Probably 1967 would be my guess. Yeah.
And that was your childhood dream car?
Yeah, the Rambler was my buddy's. He had a driver's license. I didn't. So obviously you navigate, but we ran 2 or 3. We did well. We won a rally put on by the Corvette Club, and they were so angry that a Rambler had won that they didn't give us the trophy. But we decided that we were ready to try an SCCA event, and off we went and got lost on the odometer check. So that ended my SCCA career for a few years.
For those who might not have done road rally, you start by checking the odometer. They give you a short mile or 2 distance to drive, maybe 5 miles, to make sure that your odometer is synced up with the Rally Masters odometer.
Yep.
And getting lost, I got to tell you, getting lost on the odometer check is pretty impressive.
Yeah, we did. We went to the bar, and I think I came back, found an SCCA rally. I was living in a little town south of Toledo by then. Local guy put on a charity event that I had a Corvette by then, so I wanted to go run this rally. And at work, I went, if you need a rally partner to navigate, the logical place is to go to the IT department, and grabbed a guy in IT, and we went out and started with the Northwest Ohio region running TSD rallies. So
And about what year was that?
That would have been 1978. Yeah, 1978 or 79, I think. Yep.
All right, so I'm not a youngster, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. An IT department in 1978, what was that guy's job?
Well, I mean, in that day it was mainframe
Got it.
IBM
Okay.
System 3 stuff.
Sure.
The thought of a PC or anything of the nature. In fact, I think our company was one of the last people to buy one of those IBM dinosaurs,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to have the programming and everything else to run it. But I figured, boy, a guy that can do that's going to be a math wizard, and he can do me really well as a rally navigator, and he did. He was great.
So, and while the IT person might be the best person to go after as a navigator, your significant other is not. Let me just put that
Oh,
out there.
oh, oh, oh,
Although,
oh dear, oh dear. No, no, no. There are. Um, um, I have a wonderful wife, and um, we are as different as is possible. And one of those differences is certainly car stuff. She's not a car person. She's not going to be a car person. We're not going to run a rally together. That's a sure way to have to pay alimony and child support.
yeah, yeah. Although I will say there are a lot of rally couples who've been really
Very much.
successful, and I don't know how they do it.
Yeah. Not at my house. No, no, no.
The other thing you don't want to teach your wife how to do is how to play golf. You should hire an instructor and let that person do that teaching. I tried
Yeah.
that.
The challenge on our end was um, teaching her to drive a manual transmission,
Oh
and
yeah,
I relegated that task to a great friend in the club, um, who was also one of the rally folks. And my wife went out with her and mastered a manual transmission literally in 30 minutes or less
yeah.
after I had spent. So, no, there are just some things that you understand.
I do. I do. All right, so that's your rally career. When did you cross over to the wonderful world of, now we call it solo. It's also been called autocross. My guess is that it might have been called Gymkhana when you started.
Not that Gymkhana was, at least in this part of the world, and Rocky handled the transition so well in your time with him. But the Gymkhana stuff around Toledo, at least, was pretty well gone by the late '70s,
Okay.
and it was autocross and an independent club, and then the SCCA region putting that on. Um, my rally friends were we had a special autocross here once a year. Dana Corp would let us use a 2.5 mile oval test track
Oh wow.
to do a solo. So they asked me to come out to help work tech and registration and things, and registered me in the event without telling me ahead of time.
Of course they did.
And of course, I've got this Corvette that there's no way I'm going to abuse that car like what these people were about to do. But um, on my bucket list had been a number of things. One was driving competitively, and another was doing stand-up comedy. And I've always wanted to sing in a barbershop quartet. But now there's that opportunity to drive competitively, and I was 100 feet into my first run, and hooked, saying, "This is it. This is what I want. It's the right level of risk, the right level of investment. My skill level ceases at about 70 miles an hour. Autocross is below that, so I think, yeah, I was flat hooked. 100 feet into my first run, an event that I had no intention on entering.
And who is responsible for the man who is now an SCCA Hall of Famer? Who signed you up?
Oh dear. um, Accident and fate and karma and sheer blind luck. It's that issue of not so much looking and seeking and driving for opportunity, but rather grabbing it when it happens to flit by your within your grasp. So yeah, lots of accidental things along the way, and um, um, right time, right place kind of thing.
Sure.
You know, I'm a really an analog guy, and autocross in today's world is a lot more technical. You know, we'd go out with um, liquid shoe polish to check tire pressures
Yep.
and the seat of our ass to tell how well we had done on a given run and a stopwatch. In today's world with cameras and data acquisition and on and on and on, I wouldn't be nearly as successful. So, you know, going back to your initial question, Brian, I think timing and just blind luck had a lot to do with us sitting here talking.
Sure. Sure. So you mentioned the shoe polish. Um, Now I have not done an autocross since 1990, and I'm making an attempt to get to Lincoln this year for the first time,
Great.
and I'm gonna try to get one or two events in here in Southern California before that happens. But if I don't, I'm still gonna go, and I'm still gonna sign up and just have some fun with it, with absolutely no expectations of a finishing order. If I finish last, that's fine with me. But I don't know. When I was doing it, we used the shoe polish as well to kind of see where the tire was leaning over and how much you were using. I'm assuming that that's not what we're doing anymore. Now they're using things like pyrometers and stuff like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And digital pyrometers rather than the probes,
Sure.
and on and on and on and on. Yeah,
Eh,
yeah, far beyond my skill level. And I got in at the right time, and I got out at the right time.
right, right. So when was the year that you got in? What year was that?
First
Approximately.
autocross, that one I spoke of was late '78, I think. I had joined the club that year. Um, I might be off by a year, Brian, but I went and I went to my that event where I just fell in love with it. But I mean, I got my tail handed to me on a
Sure.
plate by a guy with experience, and as always, the typical male. There are two things in this life that we think we're really good at with no practice, no skill, no training, no anything. And one of them's driving.
Of course.
And I got beat so badly that day that never mind, I was on the OE tires that the
Yeah.
Firestones GM put on that Corvette. And the guy I'm running against was on Hoosiers. I didn't know that meant anything.
Right.
And he had been doing it for 8, 9 years, and I didn't know that meant anything. So my response was to go cheat like hell. I ripped off the catalytic converter, recurved the distributor, rejetted the carburetor, went to my next event ready to get him, and he beat me just as badly. So then the answer was, I got to buy a new car. I got to get a car that will. So I got rid of my '78 base model Corvette and ordered a '79 better engine, better suspension, and went to my first event and run into that guy, and wouldn't you know it,
Got beat again.
bingo.
So
But and in seriousness, that's probably one of the bigger challenges that a new autocrosser faces, is to be able to handle the humility that it needs to develop the skill set.
right.
And again, being an American male, um, we just know that we're great drivers.
Well,
All we need is a chance to show it.
and let's add to the fact that, we drive in the winter up where you're from and where I grew up. So that makes us think we're even better drivers. Man,
Oh my, yes.
we can
Oh
drive in the
sure.
snow, we can drive on the ice,
Yep.
we've been doing this for years.
Yep.
We have this additional thought process that, well,
Yep.
if I can drive on winter roads to get back and forth to wherever, I can do this. I'm awesome. So
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the other thing too is, Brian, have you ever played golf?
I play golf a lot. I'm actually one of those people that doesn't consider himself someone who plays golf. I actually consider myself a golfer.
Good. I went out. I play golf occasionally, but I don't remember ever breaking out of triple digits for
Hmm.
a round of golf. It's not my thing. I've bowled occasionally, but boy, that's not my thing. And whatever, there's so many things we can do with our time and our money. Um, Autocrossers, somebody that comes out, tries it, and walks away. The dedicated folks are dismayed right away that, oh my God, we're doing these horrible things and discouraging these people. Number one is that realization of it takes practice, skill, time to
Right.
develop. And number two is it's not for everyone, just like golf, bowling, basketball. They aren't for everyone, but we try them and um, um, happily walk away. I'm thrilled that you've been able to succeed at golf. Good for you.
Well,
I'm jealous.
semi successful. I break out of the triple digits on occasion. But there is a
Sure.
correlation between golf and motorsports, and I've talked about it on the podcast a lot. Motorsports, if you let's say you're going to do 5 or 6 runs on the autocross course, or you've got 50 laps on a race weekend with practice and qualifying, and just like in golf, where you're going to hit pretty much every round, unless you're just starting out, one shot that feels good, looks good, and goes a long way relatively straight, or relatively where you want it to go. And in motorsports, if you've got 5 or 6 runs, or you've got 50 laps, you're going to hit one run or one lap at least over the course of a weekend that feels really good. Might not
Bingo.
It might not be the fastest on the time charts, but it feels really
Yep.
good. It gives you enough hope that I can be good at this someday, and it
Yeah.
makes you keep
Yeah.
coming back.
Yeah. No. Well, you're spot on. Well said. In 25 years of doing that stuff and running every event I could, 2-day weekends, Corvette Club would run on Saturday, on and on and on. I can still count on one hand the number of passes I made. Where when you're done, you sit there and you go, you know what, win or lose, um, that's the best I can do. That, that's it for me. I'm thrilled. That's my best effort, and that reward, just like a great golf game or even a great one hole, um, keeps you coming back.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you're a Hall of Famer. You were a Hall of Famer, one of the early classes. I think the third class that was inducted, which means you had some success. Folks in the Hall of Fame either did a ton of stuff in the background of the club to make the club better and all that kind of stuff, or they had some success on the competitive side, or a combination of both. What year was your first trip to nationals? Do you remember?
1981,
And how did you do that first year?
I won.
So now we know why.
Well,
Uh,
again, that it wasn't like I was this great stellar driver. Frankly, there wasn't a huge amount of competition. It was all fairly new folks like me, with one exception. Um, and here I am with this '79 Corvette, and by that time I'd been in it 2 years and worked pretty hard at developing skills and wheel alignments and tire pressures and shave tires and on and on and on. So I've got a 1979 Corvette, okay, which in the time was, yeah, not bad. The guy that came within inches of kicking my tail to second or third or worse was driving a Shelby GT 350, a straight axle, skinny tired. Um, 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 I mean, he drove way better than I did, but the car difference between that GT 350 and the Corvette, I mean, just in tire size alone, Brian,
right.
um, I should have been spotting him 2 seconds a course. And so again, luck played a huge part.
Well, and so that's what, probably 15 years of technology difference between that
Oh,
Shelby
yeah,
GT
yeah,
350 and your
yeah,
79 Vet.
yeah, easily.
Yeah.
Straight axle, tiny tires, um, uh, tough to get the power on the ground. I mean, he outdrove me every way there was, but
But again, now you're continually you're hooked and rehooked and rehooked and rehooked,
yeah.
and you start coming back, and you come back in how many national championships do you have?
And the solo two side, 6.
6. Was it a
Yeah.
string of 6, or were they all?
No, 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 no. On and off. The vagaries of did you have a good day or not? Um, the years of um, um, where the car classification system. I mean, there was one year they had those monster Corvettes running against Mini Cooper S was in the class,
Hmm,
and Jensen Healy's and 914 6s. Um, so class differences, a bad day driving. Lots of reasons that one year you'd win and the next year you wouldn't. What kind of day are you having today?
exactly. So which classes, did you stick with the same class over your whole time, or did you upgrade
Yeah,
over the
yeah,
years?
pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. I stayed with B stock and then super stock. That 79 Corvette stuck with me in the early pro solo days, and um, God, I love that car. But by the time the fourth generation Corvettes came out, 84, some people tried them. 85, they were getting better, and by 86, um, uh, obviously, if you're going to run a Corvette in that class, so my wife had been wanting a third child that I had resisted. I needed a new car, and we made a deal. She got the our youngest, and I got a new Corvette. It
So,
worked out well for both of us, frankly.
so how does your youngest feel that they were a straight up trade for a Corvette?
She she was a little upset. Um, by the time she got married, I had sold it, and she was a little upset because she wanted that car for her wedding, and I knew who had it and had arranged to borrow it back.
Nice.
But it's been a great family story to
Yeah.
um, and obviously it worked out well for all of us.
So I'm going to digress for a little bit. Now that I know that you're a Corvette guy, so I grew up I was a teenager in the '80s, and the Corvette was my dream car, my teenage dream car. And the like you said, the '84s came out and they had some issues, and by '86 I kind of had it all figured out. And I'm looking around now today, and the '86s in Southern California, they're pretty clean. But they're like right at the low end of their depreciation right now. And I've seen them for $5,000-6,000. I'm trying to make that same deal, except we're not having any more kids with my wife. But I think I can grab an '86 in somewhat decent shape, maybe an '87, for right around $6,000 or $7,000. Should I jump in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the world of performance cars, the Corvette's always been a bargain. For if you equate performance versus cost,
Sure.
it still is. But obviously the '86 has got a soft spot in my heart, and you're going to get a biased review here. But um, that was one of the things that um, was the luck part of what I'm talking about. I didn't know that much about these cars. Well, lo and behold, the optional engine that year, the L82, has a camshaft grind that's basically from the old 350 horse 350s of the 1969-1970 period, which have monster bottom end torque. Well, gosh, what do you want for autocross but
Bottom end torque.
monster bottom end torque?
Yeah.
Sheer luck. Number two, um, in looking at my one of my backgrounds is vehicle dynamics and some of the training stuff I've done, but I had theorized by accident the 79 was an automatic. So when I get to buying an 86, I bought an automatic. It was my opinion that in that setting, you didn't want to upset the car with the throttle, upset the suspension with the throttle, and an automatic transmission sort of cushions that. Number two, we're dealing with Pro Solo now with, drag race starts.
Mm-hmm.
Consistency could be attained a lot better with an automatic. So for those reasons, I bought another automatic. Well, lo and behold, that generation had a 2700 stall speed torque converter. I learned all this stuff later, but matched up against the bottom end torque of that engine, the stall speed of that torque converter, I mean, this thing launched like it had another 100 horsepower easily.
Right.
So when you get to that point, I mean, I assume you're not buying this to be a track car.
No, I'm buying it to drive till I
Bingo.
no longer on this earth.
Bingo. There you go. Yeah. What a great investment. But again, some of the numbers, I mean, it became that 86, 87 Corvette with that combination with the automatic was exceedingly popular. There's some pictures still around of some of the grids in the late 80s at like the Nationals. Somebody coined the phrase $1 million grid because there'd be, 30 or 40 cars in the class.
Right.
It was almost a spec class at that point. In fact, I got some backing on the commercial side. I had some nice involvement with the folks at Hydromatic. They came along with some help.
So let's talk about that for a second. Solo is not the sexiest form of motorsports out there. It's kind of like a secret to a lot of folks. It's less so now that we have YouTube, and everyone has a GoPro camera and they're putting their stuff on YouTube and showing it to their friends and their family. But
Yep.
But back in the day, when I would tell someone I was going to an autocross, they'd look at me like I had three heads. And even today, we're trying to go and take the podcast to Lincoln, and I'm trying to get some sponsors for the podcast, and it's not an easy sell. How did you find some success on the commercial side of things? I know you had some relationships with BFG and
Yep.
and you just said Dynamax. How did you get
Yep.
those folks on board? And maybe is there something we can learn from that?
Well, probably not. I mean, that was probably along the way one of the biggest accidents or issues of fate or karma. I got involved in the club locally, 78 perhaps, maybe 79, whatever. But within 6 months of joining the local region, the guy that was regional executive comes along and says, you need to be regional executive next. Typically in our area, it was a 2-year sentence. His 2 years was up.
2-year sentence.
He figured the number one job you need is to find your successor. Makes sense.
Sure.
So I think 1980, I was regional executive. And then another Hall of Famer, Wayne Zitkus from my region, kind of a gruff guy, comes up and he goes, "You think you know what this club's about and, this local stuff. If you're going to be any good, you need to go to the annual convention."
Sure.
All right. Annual convention that year was in Denver and midwinter. And I went out and, you're just sitting there, you don't know anybody from a little region in Ohio, just looking, watching, observing, trying to learn. Lo and behold, there's another guy there in the same boat, not from a region, but with BF Goodrich. And he came to SCCA to try and replicate their success that they had doing off-road truck events,
Yep.
Baja, those kind of things.
Sure, yeah.
That they were noted for. He wanted to take that into SCCA Pro Rally.
Okay.
And so he and I kind of ran into each other among the 300-400 people there and talked a little bit. And then lo and behold, I win in some raffle a set of tires. I win a set of Yokohama tires.
Okay.
Well, Yokohama didn't make anything big enough for a Corvette.
Okay.
So this guy says, well, I know the dealer here in Denver that donated those tires. I'll see if he'll switch them to BF Goodrich TA radials.
Yep.
So lo and behold, I start the 1980 Autocross season on a set of BF Goodrich TA radials, which were a significant upgrade from the OE Firestones that GM put on the car. So, I mean, and then it developed from there. They came out with some new tires, and then I was having some success. Like I said, won in 81 then on those tires. And then there was the slammed mini truck phase came along, and they came out with a line of tires that were nice, low sidewalls to fit that, but they also worked for autocross.
Okay.
So just absolute sheer luck that I ran into that guy, Brian.
So there was a time, and it sounds like probably for 10, 12 years, where the hot tire in solo was BFG, because I know that's what I had in 88 when I had my stellar solo career in a 4-cylinder Chevy Cavalier in G stock, I think it was. And
Nice.
but yeah, so I went out and put those on and had fun with that. And then eventually now it's switched to Yokohama, was a hot setup for a long time with the A007s. And then now I hear it's Hankook and Falcon is real popular, and I think Kumo makes a pretty stout solo tire as well. But back in the time, no one was targeting solo for anything, let alone tires, right?
No, they weren't. But and the first was Yokohama actually that targeted. They came along with a tire. My gosh, I'm thinking 84 timeframe maybe. It was the 001R, and they managed to sell the comp board and the solo board that this was great new technology. These were not fast wearing Hoosiers or race type rubber compounds. That they sold the solo board and the comp board both, that these should be legal tires and showroom stock and stock class autocross. And virtually all it was the beginning of the tire wars. And it went on with Goodyear got involved a little bit, but for a number of years later in the 80s, it was BF Goodrich and Yokohama banging each other over the head with the next softer compound. It hit its peak in 1988 with Goodyear, BF Goodrich, and Yokohama all constructing and delivering really special trick tires for the Solo Nationals of all things. And at that point, the solo board went no more, and that pretty much brought it to an end. There were a couple instances of where people stepped over the line, but those big wars of softer, and tires that lasted for. Now we're down to how many can you get a dozen runs out of them? At one point, Yokohama had tires that were phenomenal on the first run, and by the fourth, they were gone.
Wow.
I mean, it got that strong.
And that's a tire that 4 runs, I'm gonna guess that's what, 2.5 miles of driving, if that.
Yeah. And again, that was the extreme.
Right.
But the big play was. Number one, Yokohama was trying to crack the North American market.
Sure.
And they know, the best example is the tire rack. The tire rack has been involved with us for so long because our folks are opinion leaders. You get every SCCA member when Cousin Ralph needs tires for his car, he asks us.
Yep.
Where, what kind, what should I get? And that was a big thing for Yokohama in the early days, is to break into this North American market. The BFG lean was more in the OE direction. They were owned by Michelin by that time, and they wanted the OE fitment on the Corvette. They did everything they knew how to replace Goodyear. It's been forever the OE tire on Corvettes. So their marketing through us was directed at building a performance image that could get them the OE business. That
And
was
did they
what they
get
were
it?
looking for.
Did they finally get it?
No, no.
Because
But
at some point, Corvettes switched over to Michelin's as their
yeah,
OE.
exactly. The success came from Michelin's standpoint. All right, let's back up to Lee Iacocca. When Chrysler was in big trouble, um, between the only tire manufacturer that continued to ship them product when they couldn't pay for it was Goodyear. So they developed, decades of loyalty at Chrysler, and BFG got the OE fitment on the first Viper in 1994, but the folks at Michelin decided that that wasn't the right image for BF Goodrich to be on the Viper, so they put a Michelin on the Viper instead.
Got it.
And that's where my involvement there. We did some development work and driving and tire testing for the Viper stuff.
Right.
But again, the whole tire thing, Brian, was marketing. You know, Yokohama wanted a performance image among the sports car crowd. BF Goodrich wanted that performance image, especially at GM.
Sure.
And you win races. You might, you're not old enough. If you remember the days BFG did what was that T radial series with IMSA
Okay.
years and years ago? Yeah.
That was that the Firehawk series? No, it wasn't, because that would have been
No,
Firehawk.
that was Firestone. But same thing.
Same idea.
But the advantage that autocross has is, number one, it's accessible,
right,
to and affordable for folks. And number two is how many people are doing it.
Right.
And I've heard numbers like 100,000 people that autocross occasionally. Who knows what the numbers really are, but that those folks that sit there and go, when my sister calls, what kind of tires do I put on my minivan?
Right.
And I can say either BF Goodrich or go to the tire rack.
Yep. Well, and that's the case for all of us in the club, and this is a good lesson to be learned if you're going to go and try to find even your local tire guy or any kind of support, regardless of what level or which discipline you're doing. When I'm at work, I work at a radio station. I used to work at a television station here in LA, and even throughout the years, when people find out that I'm involved in racing, any problem with their car, they come to me first and ask me about it.
Yeah.
If they're going to go buy a new car, if they have something wrong with their car, or if they've gotten this is my favorite. They get an estimate to get their car fixed, and I am their sounding board as to whether the estimate's good or not. And that's something we should talk about when we're talking with potential sponsors and people who we might be trying to get support, is that we're we're thought leaders in this sector. And that's really important.
It is. Yeah. Subject matter experts. What do you call it with the internet today?
Influencers.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Influencers. So, that played well coming in. I mean, it was, the ties with a division of the Monroe Shock Absorber Group. It was Walker Muffler. They came out with some catback systems that I got tied up with those guys, again, by accident. But these folks in the 80s came to autocross as a way to reach large numbers of people that participated.
So today we have, in addition to autocross, in the global motorsports world, not just in the SCCA, we have HPDE, we have time trials, we have track days, we have all these different opportunities for people to get their street cars out on different types of things to do, to scratch that itch, as my good good dear friend G-Dub Henderson would say. Um, and all of that, in my opinion, was born out of autocross, right?
Uh, yeah, autocross and the variations of same. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the timeline starting in the late '40s with you know time trials at Thompson in Connecticut,
Right.
and um, then the whole Gymkhana concept of even though it was garages and stopping and braking and reverse, but there was that whole evolution that um, um, you're right that came then to autocross, and then I think in the last 20 years we've seen not just this linear
Progression.
progression of sport, but it's really branched out. And as you said, awareness is one thing, that it's easy for people to find us, to find the things that we do, and to find what the options are, and to find their niche. Um, I mean, you look at overall, my God, the car hobby is massive.
Yeah.
And you got the polishers, on and on and on. And so we each need to find our niche. And now on the driving side, the competitive side, there's so many options compared to what there were perhaps even 50 years ago when the Nationals started.
Sure. Sure. So, you, who are the people? Who is the person? Who are the people who you admire in the SCCA?
But that's interesting. There's a couple of categories almost. One is, for me, it was easy to come back. Um, my ego gets stroked. I take home a trophy. The drive home, a 12-hour tow home after winning an event's pretty pleasant. Um, for me, it was easy. Um, the folks that show up at events and um, don't take a trophy, but yet come back. I really admire that. That says it's almost a pure reason to participate. It's
Right.
it's a little more honest almost. I participate because I've got this massive ego and I'm feeding it. Okay, but the folks that show up and run and don't have a trophy. The others, I'm reminded, Sam Strano's one of the guys that I think the world of. I saw Sammy real early on in a, seems to me it was a 280Z at a local event north of Pittsburgh. And I tow in with my rig and I'm watching, and there's this young guy out doing a phenomenal job in a car that, wasn't quite, the right thing.
Sure.
But, Sam's got a great record, but he spends so much of his time helping other people,
Right.
um, 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 getting their cars right. If he said, to hell with you, I'm working on my effort, I'm gonna do what I need to do to win, um, he'd have an even better record than he does right now.
Right.
But instead, he spends his time helping other people, and it's the folks that share events, that organize events, that find sites, that that work to put events on and to make them all happen at the sacrifice of their own personal success. Um, those are the people that just amaze me, that keep coming back and doing it for purer reasons than what I did,
Right.
and I admire that a lot.
I'm coming up on, in a couple of years, 40 years of involvement in this club. Not 40 consecutive, so I have like 6 different membership numbers. There was, when you run out of money, you stop for a year or you don't get your
Yeah,
membership for
yeah.
a year, whatever the case may be. I'm a young, I had a family, starting a family. Sometimes you took a little time off, but anyway. But for the most part, with tiny gaps, I'm going on 40 years. Coming up here in 2006. Um, I got started because my dad did it. But I immediately fell in love with the cars and grease under my nails and the whole sense of the thing. But when you get to the point where you've been doing it for 20, 25, 30, whatever years, you're not coming back for the cars anymore.
No,
You're
no,
coming
no.
back because it's family.
Yeah,
I call these people my track family, and I would walk in front of a bus for these people.
yep,
And that's why we do it, right? It's the
yep,
camaraderie, it's the love of the people. We all are in the same. It's kind of like we found our tribe.
yep, yep. And for me, and I think you probably heard this from Dennis Dean and perhaps some others. The most rewarding things that I've done in this organization came after I quit competing. Um, the Hall of Fame's work. The early years, Dennis and a few other folks put it all together, but they started folding more people into the effort. And I know talking with Howard and Dennis and a few of us, that's probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done in this organization was um, looking at the folks that got us to where we are. And I'm an amateur historian, um, so we kind of formed a side group that looked at people that had influenced the club uh, um, beyond the edge of most memory, um, and digging in the records and the archives. Who made things happen in 1953?
Right.
How did this airbase thing with a place to race in the early 50s come about? That beyond rewarding to me was that work.
Yeah.
And then even then along the way, some of the other stuff, um, that first championship in 1981, you get done at the end of the day, and there's a keg of beer someplace, and um, uh, somebody goes, "Oh, hey, the trophies are over there in a box. Go over there and find yours." Okay, that was the trophy presentation. So I said, "Boy, there's got to be a better way to do this," and so we started working on formalizing, some of the trophy presentations a little bit,
Sure.
which was easier when we had fewer folks.
Right.
Um, I didn't care much for, um, the event announcing. So, geez, I jumped into that just to have some fun, and I had a mentor at home in Lloyd Loring that kind of made local events exciting just by being an announcer,
Right.
a PA system. So I dove into that for a few years, and I had some disagreements with the way the protest committee was being handled, and so my answer is, look, if you're going to complain, you better be willing to dive in. So I spent a few years doing protests. That was so rewarding
Right.
to sit there and try to adjudicate. People aren't cheaters for the most part. It's differences of opinion and rules interpretation, but to try to adjudicate some of that stuff was
Yeah.
intensely rewarding.
So I started college as a history major, and I've spent most of the last 30 years as a journalist. And I kind of consider journalism as writing the first draft of history. And
Ooh, I like that.
when I was invited, I was really kind of taken aback or caught off guard. I was invited last year to join the Hall of Fame selection nomination process committees. And I've spent the last 2 years with the Legacy Committee, which deals with people who
That's
were in the club
right.
previous to 1960. And I'm glad
Yep.
you've brought this up because that committee has one more year of existence. We're gonna sunset the Legacy Committee after next year, um, and this is not my pitch to continue the committee. Although I this is not my pitch to continue the committee, but I would just like to say that while we're on the topic that if you know somebody from those early years who did the majority of their work or competing prior to 1960, and you think they deserve a spot or a consideration in our Hall of Fame, you can go and go through the process. You can even do it today. It's the nominations for this year closed 6 days ago, so it wouldn't be for this year's class. But there's still one more class that the Legacy Committee is going to get to consider next year.
Nice.
And I'm going to talk about this a lot in the next 6 months. But if you know anybody, if you've heard the legends, if you've heard the folklore of someone in your region who was really instrumental in what we do here, take the time to fill out the form. Get some people to also fill out the form and give some testimonies as to what this person did. And we would love to hear from those folks, because I think that even though the committee is going to sunset, I think there's some people from earlier that still could get some recognition and deserve that. Do you think I'm going somewhere with that, Roger?
Yeah, yeah, I concur, and that was exactly the reason that we made a special effort to. I'm thrilled you're on that committee. One other thing I'd like to mention, if I might, was we sort of fell into a thing with competing parties at the nationals. Yokohama was the event sponsor, and of course, my friends at BF Goodrich were always trying to ride in on and garner some attention too. So we started one year with a dance. There was concurrent with our presence in Salina that year was the Kansas Hairdressers Convention at the same hotel, and the lady running that group was talking to me, doing entertainment. She had a budget. So we ended up hiring a local Blues Brothers tribute band.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Her group was primarily female. Our group's primarily male. We had a dance. We had a great time. So the next year we turned it into a joke off
Okay.
competition. Um, the winner, by the way, was Satch Carlson, if that name rings a bell.
Mm,
Used to write for Auto Week, Alaska guy.
okay.
Okay. And then it developed into a talent show. And part of the concept was, we're out here, there's 800 of us, and there's going to be 50 or 60 that are going to leave happy because they won, and the rest maybe don't have driving skills, but they have other talents. And for the years, Brian, we did that talent show. For me, it was absolutely the high point of the week. There were serious acts. One of my friends from North Carolina played Desperado on violin. Oh my God, it
Wow.
was tears in your eyes. And then some of the funniest, most creative, rolling on the floor skits and comedy that I've ever seen in my life. It truly was the high point of the week outside of the competition. And I'm really, really proud of that. But it was,
And
not
depending on
everybody's skill is
right.
behind the wheel.
And,
Somebody can play violin,
and
somebody can do skits, and we had a screaming time.
and depending on your competition, that might have been the high point of your week, even with the competition.
Yeah, that was the case frequently. Yes, no doubt.
So you did this thing for about 20, well, until about 20 years ago.
Yep, yep, yeah. 25 years, I hit it pretty hard. Yep,
And then you stopped.
yep.
Why?
Um, the one answer is I didn't leave the sport; it left me. Um, we got to the point of parsing differences in vehicles so finely, adding classes. One of my friends that knows about this podcast said, "I know you're going to bring up the too many classes thing," and absolutely. Um, in my opinion, now there will be 75 classes competing in in
Lincoln.
Lincoln this year. We're getting to the we're at the point of giving out participation awards in so many cases. I'm appalled that somebody thinks a 3 horsepower difference from one Miata to the next says we've got to do a different class. If you look at all the categories in the car preps, and it's if I have a car that I want to run race tires, but I want to run the stock seat and stock interior, only bolt-on engine parts. I mean, the whole matrix of preparation levels and the number of classes is just it's confusing to everybody.
Right.
It hurts marketing. It hurts competition. And the cries about build it and they will come. How many? We've tried a zillion things. Sport truck didn't fly. top-down imposed classes. I see Hayward's trying another one now, and in my opinion, those aren't the answer. What people want to autocross, what they enjoy autocrossing, the prep levels that they want to do, it's got to come from the bottom up. And the proliferation of classes and categories just and the destruction of competition to the point then that we had to create classes on index to create competition because we didn't have big enough classes to have it happen naturally. So that was enough for me. And plus, in all fairness, we got beyond the analog stages of autocross. The cars that were out, the cars that were there, 2002 Corvette and C06 had way more skills and talent than I did. So 25 years was enough, and time to let the dreamers have at it. I'm a firm believer in term limits, and it was time.
Well, I will tell you that your opinion on that is shared by a lot of people. You're not telling me anything I haven't heard over and over again. And I've also heard that.
Well, let me add one comment, and it's not just autocross.
Right.
In the years of the 2.5 rule in road racing, you'd have a class that would not make the 2.5 rule by all the reasons and definitions by the directors, and they'd find a reason to make an exception to keep the class around some more.
Right.
People vote with their feet and their money and their investments in cars, and when we ignore that, we destroy competition.
Well, and I've made this argument on the club racing side, pretty much identical to this, is that everyone's crying for more track time, and the easiest way to take care of that is to consolidate classes and have less groups and more time for each race, more time for each qualifying session. And we have, and I here comes the comments, Roger. There's this really cool thing out there, and I absolutely adore it, and it's called vintage racing. And
there you go.
There's a place for everybody to race, even if we consolidate classes. And while I love the older cars, there's a place for them, and we can consolidate them. And if they're no longer competitive, you can still come out and play. Just understand that you might not be competitive, but there's a place where you can go and have fun with those and be competitive-ish, and that's vintage racing. So
I had a discussion with Tim Sutter, who publishes Grassroots Motorsports and some other stuff, and he's an old English sports car fan, and he lamented that MGAs and the likes didn't have places to compete. I'm sitting there saying, okay, Tim, tell me, number one, what class you're going to put it in, and it's probably H stock. Is it going to be competitive there? No. I'll tell you what, you bring your MGA, I'm going to bring the worst clapped out version of the Chrysler minivan to an event, and I'm going to kick your ass. And it was, today's or even yesterday's minivans have capabilities beyond what those cars had. Not that they're not great. Vintage is perfect, but you can't keep them current and competitive forever. And keep creating classes to run them in.
I think we could create a vintage solo class so that people can still come and have their fun and get their itch scratched and still be part of the show and still come to the nationals and consolidate a lot of stuff. So
it was tried. It was called HC or Heritage Classic or something like that, and nobody came.
Well, you have to start eliminating the other classes though to make it work. It's only a half-hearted commitment to have a new class, but if you're going to still have another place for all those cars to run, that's really not getting it done. So
no, I concur. So anyhow, it left me. It was time. Technology moved on. I didn't, and I'm perfectly happy collecting old motorcycles, old radios, and hanging out with my grandkids.
But there is some good news to report, even though you stepped away 20 years ago. I understand that you are going to make a visit and join the crowd at our 50th run at our 50th Solo Nationals this year.
Yep. I'm going to find a place in the back of the paddock, pull my travel trailer in, and sit there with a beer cooler on one side and a couple chairs in case anybody's still around that has memory of how awesome the 80s were, and we'll sit there and gas about it for half the night.
Oh, I would love to sit there with you guys and listen to those conversations. You know, a podcast is nothing more than stories told and stories shared. So
Yeah.
that's why I love getting together with our Hall of Famers and the folks who have been doing this for a long time, because the stories are really what it's all about. And I can't thank you enough for all the time you put into the club, and obviously for coming on and joining me on the podcast here, Roger. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, it was to my benefit all the way through, and I got way more out of it than what I put in, and I loved it.
All right, so as we get ready to get out of here, I want to remind everybody that we're going to have four more episodes. And actually, I'm going to bring you back for one more second, Roger. You had mentioned I can never find a way to end the show. You had mentioned the people that you enjoy are the ones that keep coming back and help out with all the stuff, maybe sometimes in lieu of their own success. I got to get with
Yes.
Rocky. I want to figure out who is the person who's done the most solo nationals without finishing on the podium, and I want that person.
Dick Berger.
Dick Berger. Okay, I want to
Dick
make
Berger. Absolutely.
I want to make sure I get him on the show because that would be a fun podcast to do. The exact type of person you're talking about there. So.
Yeah, and Dick's one of the folks that adds a lot to the fun of the event. Not always an organizer on that side, but he's been the recipient of the Johnson Spirit of the Sport Award, which is somebody that adds to the fun of doing autocross.
Sure.
And Dick's a great guy.
Sure. All right, so this is the second of what will be at least 6 episodes focusing on our solo nationals and the 50th anniversary. So stay tuned for information on what our next episode is going to be. I think it's coming up in 3 weeks. So do that and be with us for that. And we would love for you to show up and listen to that and watch that as well. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Inside the SCCA. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the Racingwire Podcast Network or the Racing Network on YouTube so you won't miss any episodes. Also be great if you would leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. If it's a bad one, put it on someone else's page. And follow us on social media to ask a question and find out who our next guest is. On Twitter, it's @RacingWireNet. There's a new Inside the SCC every week. Wednesday nights live on YouTube, Fridays on the podcast. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend and go play with cars.
Hi, I'm Dorsey Schrader, and this is Inside the SCCA.
Inside the SCCA is a presentation of the Racingwire Podcast Network and Rule 15 Productions. This podcast is not affiliated with, endorsed, or sponsored by the Sports Car Club of America. The views expressed within are those of the host and our guests and not that of the SCCA.